This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
How many red flags does it take before an institution decides that someone isn't just difficult, but dangerous? That's a question no one really wants to ask out loud, especially not when the stakes involve a department, a university, and one of the most haunting mass murder cases in recent memory. Families don't go looking for lawsuits because they want drama. They do it because the people who were supposed to see something didn't, or at least they didn't act like what they saw mattered, or legally their hands are completely tied. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. That is a reality for many institutions. As much as we want emotion to play into this, people do have rights. And in some cases, universities or any institution or any business is basically set up to be sued no matter what you do. Get rid of someone because they're creepy and odd but haven't broken a law, you're going to get sued by the person. Keep somebody that is creepy and odd, and you risk them doing something horrible or getting into territory that then gets you sued by the people that are made to feel the way they are. It's a big gray area that no one wants to talk about because no one really has an answer on how to do anything with it other than react after something has taken place. That's a territory that we're stepping into today. The Goncalves family, Kaylee's family, is preparing to sue Washington State University. And make no mistake, they're not saying WSU caused the murders. They're not claiming the university could have predicted the violence that was coming. What they're arguing is something far more uncomfortable and far more complicated and far more relevant to anyone who's ever trusted an institution to protect the vulnerable. They're arguing that WSU saw warning signs, real ones, documented ones, repeated ones, signs that the man in their PhD program wasn't just awkward or abrasive or struggling, signs that he was making women uncomfortable, creeping out his classmates, and showing behavioral patterns that went well beyond the normal headaches of graduate school dynamics, signs that didn't just blink red, that they screamed. But did anything cross over into territory where they could have acted sooner than they did? Do we give too long of a rope, too many warnings, too many opportunities for those that we know are vile to fix their vile ways? When we know in reality they never will. We just have to count down and hope they don't cause enough problems or hurt too many people before an institution gets there. So let's go there. Let's talk about this. Let's walk through what people at WSU were actually saying about Bryan Kohberger before the murders. Let's go through what they wrote down, what they talked about in meetings, what they emailed each other, and what female students whispered to one another in hallways when they thought no one else was listening. Because once you see the full picture, the word red flag, it almost feels too soft. But it's the word that's used. What we're talking about is a pattern of behavior so consistent, so specific, and so alarming that it stands out even in hindsight as something really no one should have shrugged at. But I feel like we've been too conditioned to do this for far too long. To understand the gravity of all this, we have to look first at the environment that he walked into. The criminology program at Washington State University is small, tight, a place where everybody knows everybody. Faculty, they rely heavily on their graduate students to teach, assist, and guide undergrads. These aren't giant lecture halls with thousands of anonymous faces. This is a setting where a TA actually has power, a teaching assistant, influence, proximity, relationships. And that proximity means the power imbalance can be felt in every office hour, every classroom discussion, every late night research meeting. Students trust that these people in these roles are stable, respectful, and safe to be around. And universities trust that the graduate students they hire aren't going to cause harm intentionally or otherwise. That's the baseline. But from the moment Kohberger stepped into the WSU program, something was off. It wasn't subtle. Multiple people picked up on it immediately. He came in older than the average student, intense, academically serious, but socially abrasive in a way that wasn't just quirky, it was unsettling. People described him as someone who seemed to enjoy conflict, especially when it came to women challenging him. Someone who leaned into confrontation instead of shying away from it. Someone who didn't just break social norms, but shattered them. Seemingly in a way that he didn't even understand. And that's scary when you get that type of character in a place. When they don't even see how uncomfortable they are making other people. That lack of self-awareness can be very spooky and can go to great lengths to harm others without any sort of regard or hesitation. And that brings us to the first major category of red flags. The women in the department didn't feel comfortable around him at all. Not early on, not later, not ever. Over and over again, reports and interviews detail the same behavior. He stared, not quick glances, but curious, over-the-top stares. Prolonged, lingering stares that made women feel watched, studied, observed in a way that set off internal alarms. He stood too close, he hovered, he blocked people's paths in hallways, he lingered outside offices, he showed up in places where women didn't expect him to be, and this wasn't one woman saying it. It was several. The kind of thing that when you hear it from one person, you might chalk it up to a personality mismatch. But when you hear it from many, and this is what makes this situation a bit different and gives it legs, if you will. It's a pattern of behavior. And unfortunately, a lot of institutions, a lot of ways of dealing with these problems don't necessarily watch for patterns of behavior. They look at individual incidents and handle them individually, rather than putting the dot here, putting the dot there, putting another dot here, and hey, look, we got a pattern going on. When people start avoiding being alone with him, when women at the university, smart, educated, socially aware women, are quietly forming strategies to avoid a man in their own department, you have a problem. That is not awkwardness. That is fear. There were also incidents where he physically boxed people in, standing in doorways or inches too close, creating what faculty called a spatial trapping. That's a behavioral red flag recognized in both criminology and psychology, using space, body positioning, and physical presence to control or intimidate another person. One faculty member even described moments when female students seemed desperate to escape an interaction with him, only relaxing once someone else stepped in. These are not normal classroom dynamics. They're the seeds of something darker, something universities are supposed to be trained to recognize. But are they? Are we? And recognizing it is just one thing, but what do you do about it? What if that checklist, that box of things you need to go through for any sort of truly meaningful, actionable resolution to take place is just too long? Meaning, yeah, you can start checking the boxes, but by the time something actually finally gets done, the damage is already there. That's, I think, the gray area that everyone needs to be looking at in every aspect of their world, their life, their business, their workplace, their school, whatever it may be. Recognizing the behavior in others that isn't safe, that isn't right earlier, and calling it out for what it is. Not just, oh, they're awkward, they're this, they're that. But for being potentially dangerous. And then we get into that problem, that word potentially. potentially and legally are two different things. Now, we don't necessarily have a system that is set up to protect the vulnerable, the innocent, from the predatory in a way that accurately and safely and justly defends the rights of both. Because not everybody who's weird and awkward is predatory. There are a lot of people out there that don't get it, for lack of a better term. As scientific as it is, they don't get it. But we all know them. There are folks that just, they don't have those sort of senses about them. They're harmless, but they're not predatory. And then you have some that are just flat out predatory, and that's the only mode that they know. Both can present rather similarly at first. But what is that line that one draws when they know this is more than just someone that's awkward, someone that may be autistic, that doesn't have great social skills, to this person potentially is a threat to everyone around them? That's what we're wrestling with. And I in the comments section on YouTube, give me your thoughts. Give me, because I'm not here to make excuses for WSU. I'm here just talking about the environment to which we live, and to where the hands can be tied over here and they're tied over here. And what do you do? What can we do? Because something needs to be done. So you have the pattern of Kohberger boxing people in, making them uncomfortable. And if that's not unsettling enough, wait until you hear how people talked about him behind closed doors. This is where the red flags stop being hints and start becoming neon. People in the department, graduate students, professors, began using a specific set of words to describe him. Not awkward, not quirky, but creepy, sexist, condescending, hostile towards women. And the one that should send chills down everyone's spine, possible future rapist. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't hyperbole. That was a sentiment expressed by people who interacted with him daily. Imagine being part of a department where your colleagues, your peers, your classmates are openly speculating whether another student in the building is dangerous, and not in a vague way, in a very specific, very gendered way. A professor even told investigators later that she works with predators and believed Kohberger fit the profile. She wasn't saying he committed a crime. She was saying the behavior patterns, the controlling body language, the hostility towards women, the desire to dominate classroom discussions, the belittling comments aligned with traits she recognized professionally. That's what the allegations are, essentially. It's a red flag so bright it should have lit the entire building. But we're not done. We are not done. Because the next layer involves actual conduct as a TA. Behavior that doesn't just upset students, but force the university to take formal disciplinary action. Students accused him of grading women more harshly than men, of speaking to female students with rudeness and condescension. Condescension, not condensation. Condensation would mean he was speaking and there was condensation coming out of his mouth and landing on people. Although that might, who knows? He seems like a close talker. Condescension. Or treating them like they were beneath him. Multiple complaints came in about the same theme. His attitude towards women was not just dismissive, it was contemptuous. And this wasn't just whispered in hallways. Students filed formal complaints, emails were sent, and in some cases, those emails included 911 in the subject line to signal urgency, allegedly. Think about that. A university student felt so uncomfortable, allegedly, with a TA's behavior that she used 911 in the subject line of a formal communication. That's not someone overreacting. That's someone who's afraid. It means right now something needs to be done. This can't be some sort of bureaucratic paper trail that we end up dealing with 3 years down the line, which is exactly what we're doing right now. Inside the grad student office, they had a tally board allegedly tracking his lateness, his outbursts, his inappropriate comments. When coworkers have to start keeping score inside their workplaces to manage someone's behavior, something is deeply wrong. And WSU wasn't oblivious. The lawsuit alleges they knew. They documented it. They met with him. They warned him. They constructed a timeline that in any other institution would have triggered something far more serious in a few meetings in a disciplinary plan. That's the allegation. Because they did go through this process. They did have a plan. And he failed. And he was let go. And then he killed 4 people. But let's walk through this timeline. The first altercation with the professor happened on about September 23rd of 2022, allegedly, not long after he entered the program. This wasn't a disagreement. It was an incident serious enough that it required an official conversation about his conduct. On October 3rd, the university sat him down to discuss his professionalism. That's early in a program to already need that kind of conversation. A TA expected to represent the department shouldn't be having that kind of meeting within a month of starting. On October 21st, he received an email saying he still wasn't meeting expectations. That's a written notice. It's a paper trail. When universities document behavior, it's not accidental. Someone is preparing for escalation if needed. And in November, the department held mandatory behavioral training for graduate students, training that multiple insiders later said was prompted by him. Think about that. An entire group of graduate students dragged into a meeting because one person's behavior was so disruptive, the department felt the need to intervene collectively. On December 9th, he had a second altercation, allegedly, with the same professor. 2 confrontations, 2 different months, escalating tone. And 10 days later, on December 19th, just over a month after the murders, WSU fired him from his TA position for behavioral issues. This wasn't a student who was flying under the radar. This wasn't someone who kept his head down and blended in. This was someone whose pattern of behavior was so consistent, so problematic, and so gender-focused that it created an escalating series of meetings, warnings, interventions, and eventually termination. Universities do not fire graduate students from TA positions casually. That's the academic equivalent of a workplace saying, "We can't trust you with people." But here's the question the Goncalves family is implicitly raising. If the university saw enough to fire him in December, what do they think his behavior meant in September or October or November? What did they think the women's complaints signaled? And why didn't those red flags trigger a more serious internal response? Now, to be fair, and this matters, some behaviors that people noticed only became meaningful after the murders. The disheveled appearance, the sudden shift in demeanor, the refusal to engage in any classroom conversation about the murdered students. A student reported seeing him with what looked like bloody knuckles right after the killings. Another noted that he stopped bringing his phone to class after the murders. Someone else recalled him making a comment that the killer may have been pretty good and that it might be a one-and-done type situation. If you heard those things from random classmates, maybe you'd shrug them off. After the murders, though, they became eerie. But again, we can't retroactively blame WSU for things they didn't know during the actual fall semester at hand. The real issue here isn't hindsight. It's the behavior the university did know about, the behavior they documented while it was happening wasn't benign. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't grad school stress. It was gendered, targeted, and repeated. And that matters. Because when women start sending 911 emails about the TA's behavior, that's a sign of potential danger. When faculty discuss a student as a possible predator, that's a sign. When a department feels compelled to hold mandatory training because one student is creating problems, that's a sign. When someone is fired because their behavior escalates to the point of serious professional failure, that's a sign too. The Goncalves family argument is not that WSU should have predicted murder. It's that WSU recognized the behavior as a pattern with sexual and predatory overtones, and that once you're in that territory, universities carry a higher responsibility. When you see a pattern of hostility towards women, boundary violations, physical intimidation, and growing volatility, institutions are supposed to understand that this isn't an academic issue. It's a safety one. Now, WSU will have its own argument, and it will be a strong one. Universities aren't law enforcement. They don't evaluate students using criminal risk metrics. They don't investigate unproven allegations without evidence. They don't remove students based on personality clashes or social awkwardness. WSU did meet with him. They did warn him. They did implement a behavioral pattern, and they did fire him. From their perspective, they did follow the protocols. But that's also the point. Sometimes institutional protocols aren't enough. Sometimes the rules for when and how a university intervenes don't keep up with reality. And the reality is this. Multiple women were uncomfortable. Multiple faculty members were concerned. Multiple complaints were filed. Behavior was documented. Problems escalated. And the university responded with meetings instead of decisive intervention. And maybe that's at the heart of the whole thing. We have a cultural problem, a far bigger problem than WSU, far bigger than this case, where institutions minimize pattern behavior because it's easier than confronting the uncomfortable truth. Dangerous people don't show up fully formed. They show up as boundary pushers. They show up as intimidators. They show up as people who make women feel unsafe. And when institutions treat those early warning signs as nuances rather than threats, they create blind spots. Blind spots that only are too obvious after it's too late. I'm not saying WSU should have predicted the murders. I'm saying they're legally responsible for what happened. I'm not saying, rather, they're legally responsible for what happened in Idaho. I want to be clear on that. What I am saying is what the Goncalves family is saying, is that if these red flags didn't justify treating him as someone who posed a risk, then what exactly would a student have to do for a university to take that step? How obvious does it need to be? How many complaints? How much discomfort? How many warning signs before the department says this isn't just odd behavior, this is dangerous behavior? It's a fair question. The red flags were everywhere. Students felt them, faculty felt them, the university documented them, and yet the institutional response never matched the level of concern people privately expressed, at least not in a timely enough manner. So I go back to the beginning. How much rope do we give people like this? That's why the Goncalves family is pushing into the light, not blame. Not finger pointing, but a demand for accountability from a system that too often files complaints away as administrative chores instead of signs of potential harm. And that is the question that lingers long after the timeline is laid out and the documentation is reviewed. If these red flags didn't matter, what would? That's the question. Your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. If you're not already there, please check us out. Just search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. You'll find us there. Please hit subscribe. We're trying to get to 100,000 by the end of the year. We're getting closer. With your help, we can probably make it. But we'll see. So please do that. Most importantly, your thoughts in the comments. Want to see it? We read them. We reply. Let's hear it. Until next time, I'm Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.